Okay, so right now my BMW X1 is in the shop. It has been driven over 10,000 miles and therefore it needs service. It also needs a state inspection. Also, I damaged it on my travels, but that car took me through quite a journey over the course of the last month. And for those who don't know, for anybody who's been unclear about the trajectory of this mission I've been on around the US, originally I was going to drive to New York to see this girl who I was talking to online, and then to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to hang out with Fern. You can watch the Pittsburgh vlog to see how that went. Then to Cincinnati, Ohio, to hang out with Best Guy Ever. We recorded a whole bunch of shit that's been coming out on his channels, especially Bestie Boy. Then I went to Michigan to stay with Endless Jess. We recorded ridiculous amounts of stuff that most of which won't come out for a long while. And then I was going to then try to cross the Midwest and go to Portland and stay there for a week and then drive from there to LA because of Anime Expo, and then over the course of the next few weeks drive my way back across the Midwest to Virginia. But I canceled that leg of the trip. Now I'm still going to Portland and LA. I'm just flying, and that's going to happen tomorrow. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow, flying to Portland, staying there for a week. Then I'm flying from Portland to LA for Anime Expo, and then I'm flying from LA back here, and that'll be the end of my big journey. And so for that part of the trip that was originally, basically my schedule actually didn't make any sense. I gave myself a whole week and a half to cross the Midwest, and I only needed a few days, so I didn't know what I was going to do for those extra days. And instead, I circled back around to New York to see my girlfriend again, and then came back home, and now I'm going to fly. So, in total, I drove through Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, Michigan, and Canada. Ontario specifically. So I'm going to rank the driving experiences in these places. Now, it just so happens that the month before, I'd also driven to Atlanta, where Ben lives now, and so I've also driven through North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. I'm going to rank all of them. I'm going to explain to you the driving experience in each state, because it really is state by state, the driving experience changes considerably, because each state has its own driving laws, its own ways of organizing highways, its own ways of doing road work and stuff like that. There's just a lot of differences between driving in each state, and oftentimes state borders are set up in such a way that each state really looks totally different. Each one has its own kind of topography. I don't know if that's the right word for that, but anyway, they're all very different, so that's why I'm going to run through them all and sort of rank them from best to worst, and talk about what separates them. And in some ways, you could even say that different highways have their own personality. It's not just state by state. Some states sort of change if you go to different highways. Virginia itself being a great example of that. But anyways, we'll get to that in a bit. So by far, the coolest state to drive through on the American East Coast is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is fucking dope, because first of all, speed limit is pretty much always 65 to 70, and if you're only going 15 over, you're getting passed. People fly at 90 miles an hour all around Pennsylvania, and there's no cops anywhere. So you can drive basically as fast as your heart wishes. And in addition to that, the scenery is fucking epic. Driving up through the center of Pennsylvania, there's this long section where the whole state is just nothing but mountains. It's all these gigantic mountains that cities are built into the valleys between these huge mountains. And so as you're going through, you'll be passing by all these giant epic mountains, and then also sometimes they'll just be the highway is just cut through the side of a mountain. The very edge of a mountain has just been chopped, and there's a sheer cliff, and you're driving through that. Sort of how it looks in Japan, as portrayed in any anime. When you see people driving through the Japanese countryside, Pennsylvania looks very similar. And a lot of it is right on the side of this gigantic fucking river. So you're driving up, and there's a fucking huge river to the right of you with all these like islands and stuff and mountains and fucking mist rolling through, and it looks fucking insane. And then on the left you're driving like through mountains and shit. It's really cool. There's one city that's like right smack in the center of Pennsylvania that the highway cuts through, and it sort of changes directions for you. And it's just the coolest looking city in the world because it's built right into this little valley between all these mountains. And like from basically any higher up point in the city, you could see the whole thing. Like you can just see the entirety of this huge town. And it's really gorgeous. And so driving through there, really fucking cool. All these like curving mountain passes, people are flying 90 miles per hour down like these fucking epic curves. It's Initial D, basically. The whole state is Initial D. It's pretty fucking dope. And that's just driving through the center of Pennsylvania. I've driven through in several different ways because I went to Philadelphia for the Dick Show live, and the roads going into Philadelphia are fucking cool because they've got these highways where it'll be like one highway over top of another, and then like these blue like walls like connecting them. It's like a tunnel in midair. It's fucking cool. And that looks really sick. Driving into Philadelphia looks really sick. Driving into Pittsburgh also looks sick. I came down like the left side of the state because it's a fucking enormous state. It's 3.5 hours or so to drive across it. But as I was driving down towards Pittsburgh, when you come into Pittsburgh, the city is very very brightly lit. Like they've got all these colored lights and stuff on the buildings, and like it's very cool to look at. But the place I went, where Fern lives, is on a mountain. Like Pittsburgh has a big ass mountain next to it, and as you're driving down the highway, you're getting closer and closer to this mountain, and then you start noticing there's all these lights up on the mountain. There's like houses up there, and you know, as I'm approaching, I'm thinking, wait, is there a town on the mountain? And then suddenly you're going through a tunnel into the mountain, so the tunnel cuts through the bottom of the mountain. And then right at the end of the tunnel is a road that goes up the mountain. And there's a whole fucking town built on top of the mountain. It's considered part of Pittsburgh, but like it's a whole other town. And that's where Fern lives. And so up there, I drove up the side of a mountain, and it's like super quiet. Everything is like unbelievably silent up there. And it's a fucking trip. It was the quietest place that I've ever seen. Like, in spite of being a pretty dense little town, it's quiet as fucking the dead. It was a trip, and it was really cool. It was a great driving experience. Everything about Pennsylvania, driving through Pennsylvania fucking rules. I'm gonna take a second to write down all these states so I don't forget any. Alright, the second best state to drive through is probably, surprisingly, Virginia. Which I kind of take Virginia driving for granted because I've been up and down the interstate here dozens of times going up to Baltimore and DC, and like to me it's just like the platonic ideal of what a highway is. Like it's the only one I've really been, you know, on extensively, so like I just see it as like, yeah, this is what a highway is. But after going to other states and seeing the difference, I appreciated ours a lot more. First of all, I appreciated the speeds more than I expected to, because Virginia Beach, the city I'm in, has lots of cops, and the highways are like 55 miles an hour. Granted, everyone does way over the speed limit, and like, I don't know, I had always thought that people were just being like really daring, but like, I mean, it happens constantly and nobody ever gets pulled over, so I really didn't think about like, man, I guess maybe they're just not that strict here. And a lot of the highways are 70 miles an hour, and you can just fly. And most of the highways here, like the bulk of the state is you're just got like two lanes, and trees on the sides. Like all you see is trees, which at nighttime is fucking terrifying because it looks like you're driving into a fucking horror film. But so yeah, like much of it is just looking at trees and going extremely fast, but in certain places it changes considerably, and I'd say more so than any other state I drove through. The highways really evolve as you go through Virginia Beach, because down here in Hampton Roads, which Virginia Beach is a part of, The highways are all very open and spacious and beautiful and well lit and like well taken care of. The speed limits are a little lower, but like the highways look really good, and there's all these tunnels that you're going to go through. Like if you're crossing any of the rivers in Virginia, then you're going to go through a tunnel. We've got the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnel as well, which is the longest bridge tunnel in the world, a bridge with 2 tunnels on it, which connects from like right down the road from my house up to Maryland. So long ass bridge. It takes like 20-30 minutes to cross. It's fucking epic. But anyways, so you got all these bridges and tunnels and all that cool shit, and then in the northern part of the state, when you're closer to DC, then you've got the cool architecture and the cool infrastructure, because there's all these highways that just like pass over each other in 5 different directions. Like you'll have like an overpass going like this, and then another one on top of it going that way, and then another one going this way, and like 7 overpasses stacked on top of each other or something. That always looks really cool. Matter of fact, though, the coolest one, I mean, going into either Philadelphia or Baltimore, they have the coolest overpass setups where it's just like insane passing over and under each other. But the Virginia, the upstate Virginia ones are pretty cool too. And when you go into DC, then you get to see like the Washington Monument and like all kinds of cool shit. There's all these like weird structures in Virginia. Like if you're passing down through Hampton, you're going to see the Hampton Coliseum on the side of the road. If you're passing through the northern part, you'll see there's this one building that looks like the Legion of Doom headquarters that looms over the horizon and stuff. There's lots of like weird, interesting stuff you'll see on the road. You'll see like giant RV dealerships and stuff like that. So yeah, Virginia is by and large pretty cool. Now, I'm considering Virginia separate from DC though. So discount the memorials and stuff like that, because DC is hell, and we'll get to that lower down on this list. Driving through DC fucking blows ass, but the rest of Virginia is pretty great. Now, number 3 I'm going to give to North Carolina, because when you're just cutting through the center of North Carolina, it's pretty much identical to the bulk of Virginia. You drive really fast and there's lots of trees on the side. But North Carolina will also often take you through these bizarre offshoot highways where you just pass through the most fascinating brand of Americana there is, which is to say, like, hillbilly towns and like just random houses on the side of the road, just shacks, like shitty shacks as far as the eye can see. You drive through all these shitty little small towns which are like literally 2 houses and a church, and that'll be like the whole town, and you're just like, what is who lives out here? It's the middle of fucking nowhere. And I mean, there's a lot of American highways that will just cut through random small towns, but North Carolina has the most like sparse, bizarre, how can anyone live here kinds of places that you pass through, and you pass through them fast. Like, it doesn't really slow you down for these towns. You're just like hauling ass through the center of this state and seeing all this fucking weird shit, all these weird hillbilly places, and wondering how it's possible that they exist. Like, who would live out here and how do they live? You know, what do they even pay to live out here? Like, some of these are like just like shithole shacks that are out there in the middle of nowhere, and that's always fascinating to look at. If you drive down the beach, like if you're going like right on the coast down to Nag's Head, which I've been to a lot because my grandma lives down there, there's like just an endless stretch of billboards and random like crap, you know, just like random little stores that are like, there's one place that's just got a big monster truck, and it's just like, hey, come here and look at the big monster truck, you know, or like south of the border and stuff like that, like these like, oh, we'll sell the stuff that you can only get in this state. South Carolina is most famous for that, so I'll get to that in a bit. But like, yeah, there's just tons and tons of weird ads and random shit on the side of the road, which makes it kind of a fun drive, even if it is a little bit slower. Next up, I'm gonna give it to Maryland. Maryland is, you can cut through it pretty quickly. It's not exactly a long or exciting drive, but it is pretty scenic, and you can go fairly fast. It's like, it's not too different from Virginia or Pennsylvania. I'd say it's like a combination of those two. Like, if you took some of the beautiful mountainous scenery of Pennsylvania, but like toned it down a bit, and the driving speeds and stuff of Virginia, but toned down just a little bit, you get Maryland. It's like when I was passing into it from Virginia, I remember like having this moment of like, oh wow, look at all these pretty mountains out here. Like, oh, the fog lifting over these rolling hills and stuff looks pretty cool. And the only reason that it was like utterly topped is because Pennsylvania is just that much cooler looking. So like Maryland's still gorgeous to drive through, but once you've seen Pennsylvania, you're kind of like, yeah, you know, Maryland, you're like the kid brother of the insane trip that is driving through Pennsylvania. But still, Maryland's pretty cool. Again, it's got like a dope ass overpass system when you pass into Baltimore that looks really cool. Always been a fan of that. But yeah, not too much to say about Maryland. Again, it's a really short cut through because it's a super thin state, and so if you're going up north, you're probably going to spend less than an hour driving through Maryland. Next up, I'll give it to Georgia, because even though Georgia is, again, nearly identical to Virginia driving, lots of trees on the side of the road, haul ass down an endless series of highways, and Georgia has really all the southern states have like a lot of road work problems where they'll get down to one lane in places because they're fixing one of the 2 lanes that there are, and so you're one lane driving. That's a real pain in the ass. But Georgia has Atlanta, and when you get to Atlanta, when you're like anywhere near Atlanta, it opens up into these fucking insane 16-lane highways, like 8 lanes per side, all over the place outside Atlanta. And I've never seen highways that big. I mean, I haven't been to New York City, so I don't know if it's even bigger there. I've been to a lot of big cities, though. I've been to a lot of the country, and like those fucking highways going in and out of Atlanta, I was just like, what is happening? Like one half of the road looks like a whole road, and it's fucking intense. And so there's plenty of space to drive around, and I mean, like, they need all those lanes because there's a shitload of cars going around. Because Atlanta, while a fairly populous city, is not hyper dense. You have to drive around really to get anywhere. So there's tons and tons of cars on the road, and yeah, the super open highways look really cool, and it's pretty fun to drive around. Again, you can go pretty fast. It's not that different from Virginia, but I'd rank it lower just because it had more road work, less scenery, less like totally bizarre structures that you pass by and stuff like that. But I do really like those super open highways. And next up, just to round out the whole lower East Coast, is South Carolina. It's pretty much the same thing as North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia. They're all very similar to drive through. South Carolina, again, has stuff like south of the border, because you can buy fireworks in South Carolina and you can't in the surrounding states. So they have a store that's like right on the border, like, hey, come here and buy fireworks, and stuff like that. Just generally looser laws. So passing through... Oh, I forgot to write down West Virginia. I forgot I passed through West Virginia very briefly. So yeah, that's South Carolina, and I guess West Virginia falls in around this same area. Like, it's a lot more mountainous. It's pretty cool to drive through in terms of like just looking badass, and it's got cool bridges. In fact, I'd put that above most of these ones I've said. That might be like second or third place, because yeah, the highways... not only do you drive like through mountains, but the highways go really high up and really far down, so you've got these like huge peaks and valleys, lots of big like turning around an entire mountain kind of stuff, some pretty dope looking bridges, and they've got like a bunch of stores that are like last stop for cheap cigarettes kind of stuff, which Maryland has that too, because Pennsylvania, cigarettes are insanely expensive. Pennsylvania and New York, for whatever reason, I guess it's just there and anywhere north of there, cigarettes are really expensive. So, if you're passing through West Virginia or Maryland, then they will heavily advertise, like, hey, before you pass into Pennsylvania, maybe come buy a few packs of cigarettes, So yeah, I think I'd put West Virginia possibly right behind Pennsylvania. It is pretty dope to drive through, and I forgot I did because I only passed through it for like probably 45 minutes on my way into Ohio. But I did stop and buy cigarettes there, which was unnecessary because cigarettes aren't expensive in Ohio. But yeah, West Virginia is pretty dope. Alright, now we're kind of getting into the lower half of my list. So far, all the states I've talked about are pretty fun to drive through. Now we're getting into the ones that are a little bit more boring. Like, these are ones that either aren't that great or outright suck. Starting with Ontario, which is part of Canada. I passed through because I was going from Michigan to Rochester, New York, which is like a straight line through Canada. There's just one highway that goes all the way through that part of Canada for like 3 or 4 hours. So I drove through Canada for a while, and it's not like visually, it's not any like this distinctive from the American states that are nearby. You know, lots of flat plains or just like mild hills. Nothing really like epic or scenic to look at. You pass through some normal towns. It's pretty typical. It's just like driving through any of the southeastern states. So scenery wise wasn't that cool. Now the speed limits are definitely lower there than they are here. Like, and they're all in fucking, of course, kilometers. So it was like 100 kilometers per hour was the main speed limit on this road, which is about 60 miles per hour. Pretty slow. And I wasn't willing to go more than 10 over, and it didn't look like a lot of people were willing to go more than 10 over, because so I was like, okay, you know, don't drive too fast through Canada. Now, what I will say about Ontario that was cool is that the road work is extremely well organized. Now, in most of the United States, road work is just like you start seeing signs and you start seeing cones and maybe some arrows pointing you in the right direction, but like it'll just seemingly go on forever and in all directions, and it's super disorganized, and like they'll lead you through all these like bizarre paths where like the roadwork switches from one side of the road to the other, and like it's a nightmare. That's like the biggest knock I have against Pennsylvania, is the roadwork is extremely disorganized there. Whereas in Canada, it is a very strict formula. 2 miles before, or 2 kilometers before the roadwork starts, there will be a sign that says roadwork starts in 2 kilometers, and then another sign when it's 1 kilometer. Then there will be an arrow and a progression of cones blocking off that lane. You slow down by exactly 15 kilometers per hour every single time, and you slowly make it through there. The cones recede, and it says back to 100 kilometers per hour right at the end. And it's always the same. It's completely identical. I probably passed like 6 or 7 roadworks. A lot of roadwork, so that's a problem. But the fact that it was so organized, whereas in the U.S., you never know what the slowdown's going to be. Sometimes it's like drop to 55, sometimes drop to 45, sometimes drop to 35, sometimes, it'll go on for 5 fucking miles. In Canada, it's very organized, so that was cool. But otherwise, I mean, whatever. You're just driving through a bunch of fucking hills and fields. Which is exactly what I'd also say about Ohio. Ohio, the road itself is fine. It's a lot of just straight shots. You know, Ohio is where it starts to look like the Midwest. It's also where they start to have this the signs that will say, keep right unless passing, where basically you just stay in the right lane unless you're going to pass somebody. Because if you're just hauling ass in the left lane, I guess you're a suspected drug trafficker. So that's a thing in the Midwest. But yeah, like it'll just be a straight shot through a big ass field. Like there's nothing in Ohio. The whole state is just an endless field, you know. I mean it's a little hilly. It's not like it's flat, but there's nothing to look at all. So Ohio, very boring, very straightforward. That was the most tired I felt driving on this trip, was always when I was driving through Ohio. I always felt like I was going to pass out because it's literally just a straight shot into nothingness. Next up, Michigan. Michigan is a little better looking than Ohio. It looks more similar to like Virginia or something like that. Sort of hilly, mostly trees. The problem with Michigan is that not only is there a shitload of road work, but there needs to be a lot more because the roads are ass. All the roads I drove on in Michigan are just like, just constant bumps or like just uneven pavement, shitty pavement. All the roads suck that I drove on. Now, granted, I went on like one highway on my way to like Flint / Lapeer, which I mean is like the main city, so probably they're one of their better highways. But yeah, the highways are garbage. Otherwise, it's just boring. I mean, it's not like a huge pain to drive on or anything. It's fine, other than the fact that the highways are badly paved, so that takes it down a notch. Now, DC. This is where we get into shit driving territory. DC fucking blows because their highways are super confusing. There's like 1,000 turns in every direction. Like left lane takes you this way, right lane takes you that way, middle lane takes you a different way, and they're confusing and hard to read. and navigation has only recently gotten good enough that it can really handle it. And more importantly, traffic jams at all times, all hours of day, every day. DC is going to be backed up somewhere. If you're trying to get through that fucking city, you're always going to get caught in a traffic jam. Even if you're like way on the outskirts of the city, on an interstate that's meant to to go around the city, you're still going to hit a traffic jam. I've driven through DC, like, again, probably dozens of times, and it's always backed up. So, yeah, it's shit. It takes a fucking eternity. You spend as much time passing through that one fucking city as you do passing through like half a state. You know, it's fucking ridiculous. But by far the worst driving experience in the country is upstate New York. New York fucking blows. Not the least of which reason that I got a ticket there. Because New York is very, very driving safety focused. There's like tons and tons of safety signs, and the speed limits everywhere in the state are like 10 miles slower than they would be anywhere else. Like, you know, open interstate is at most 65 as opposed to 70, usually 55. Even when you're in towns, though, like roads that would be 45 elsewhere are 40. Roads that would be 40 elsewhere are 35. You know, like everything's 5 or 10 miles slower than it would be. And so the interstate, even when it's even when it's 65, crawling with cops. And I got pulled over because they have a fucking speed trap right at the entrance of the state. Because Pennsylvania, everyone's doing 90, flying down the highway. And then that highway just turns into New York, and now you're at 65. And if you miss the sign, like I did, and you're not sure what speed you're supposed to go, you're fucked. Because New York, everywhere in the state that I went, like the speed limits would, like, the signs were rare. Like, they'd be weirdly spread out. For a state that cares so much about driving safety, you can never tell what the fucking speed limit is if you miss a sign. So, and they're super spaced out. So I'm sitting there, like, not sure what the speed limit is. I'm doing, like, 90, and I start coming up on a group of cars, and, like, I notice they're going slower, and I'm like, why is everybody slowing down? And then, like, of course, right then, I notice the cop right as I'm passing by it. And, yeah, he pulls me over, and I got a speeding ticket. So, yeah, from then on, I was, like, cruise control at 70 anytime I was on that road, you know, like, or generally in New York, I did the fucking speed limit or 5 over and cruise controlled it, so I wouldn't go crazy, you know. But yeah, swarming with cops all over the highway. And that's just on the one highway, like, that goes, like, straight up from Pennsylvania to Rochester that is actually a highway. Because if you're driving around any other route through New York, it takes you through 1,000 small towns, and that's all it is. It's just a constant drive through small towns. When I was going to Pittsburgh, or when I went to Niagara Falls, or passed in from Canada, like, the fucking, it'll just take you through like a route that just goes through every small town. So you'll get up to like 55, and then it'll slow you down to 35, and then 55 and 35, and 55 and 35 every couple of miles. You can never just like lock into a speed. You're constantly changing speeds. You're constantly passing through small towns, and like the routes will be fucking complicated as shit. Like the route that goes from Rochester down to the edge of Pennsylvania was like constant turns and weird paths and like going down back roads in small towns. Like the only reason you know you're still on the right path is because every once in a while you'll see like a Route 40, and it's like, oh, this is actually the planned route that the state set up to get through this part of the fucking state. And yeah, it's a huge pain in the ass. Like when I drove to Pittsburgh, that whole route, I was just like, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, kill me, until the second I entered Pennsylvania, and it just dumps you on a highway, and it's a straight shot doing 70 to Pittsburgh. And I was like, oh, thank God, Pennsylvania, you're such a beautiful place. I love driving through you. New York sucks shit to drive through. It's easily the worst thing about New York is the driving experience. So yeah, that's all the states I've driven through. If I drive through any more, I'll update this thing, and let me know if you've got different experiences driving through these states. Obviously, a lot of these I only used like one route because I was just going straight to that city and then straight to the next one. So it's not like I drove through the whole heart of each of these states. But yeah, that's my driving experience review. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next.